This week on Shelter in Place, we have major figures from both the worlds of business and politics. Mark Cuban is an entrepreneur, investor, and owner of the Dallas Mavericks, and Steny Hoyer is the House Majority Leader, one of the most powerful people in Congress, and a pivotal figure in Democratic policy towards COVID-19 and the ensuing economic crisis. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Shane.
So we've had these record job losses. We've had, the end of restaurants, bars, nightclubs, everything shut down. Yet the stock market seems to be sort of ignoring it, holding its breath, waiting. There's a lot of people saying, look, the recession is coming, if not already here. Other people are saying, look, this is not a recession. It's going to be a depression if we look at the knock-on effects. What are you seeing? What are you thinking? What's happening with the economy today?
Well, there's two different things. There's the stock market and there's the economy. I think the economy is really challenged, whether it's a recession or a depression, I don't know. We'll find out. In terms of the stock market, they're all just betting on the fact that the Federal Reserve is here to bail them out. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality, and that's what's holding up the market and bonds.
Let's talk about that. Because the last time in 2008, we had a stimulus package under President Obama, which arguably wrecked the Congress. We had the start of the Tea Party. Obama was under fire for his presidency.
The question is, are we making things better or are we making things worse?
That was $700 billion and change. This is $2.3 trillion for the first wave of this package. Okay, what happens with this $2.3 trillion stimulus package?
So last time we were trying to solve a financial crisis. We had banks and insurance companies who lacked liquidity, and the Fed was just trying to keep them alive. And the unfortunate side of it was the American taxpayers didn't get their money's worth, right? We didn't get anything in return. We didn't get stock options, warrants, any of the things a good negotiator would have gotten. And that led to some of the knock-on effects with the Tea Party and a lot of people being upset in how taxpayer money was spent. Today, we're dealing with a medical issue first that's led to a huge negative impact on the economy. This is a disaster for the individual. This is a disaster for the citizens of the world. The number of jobs lost is insane. I mean, it's just horrific. The number of underemployed people is going to skyrocket. That's going to be horrific. And we've got to start looking at it from a bottom-up perspective. How do we support the people at the bottom so there's an economy able to spend money so that there's truly a GDP? And that's something that's yet to be determined.
You talked about the last stimulus package and not making good deals. You've referenced Warren Buffett getting a preferred series of stock. Maybe you could talk about why you prefer the so-called Buffett method and what we should be doing now.
Look, everybody's a capitalist when the market's going up, right? But when things tend to go south, those capitalists turn into socialists very quickly and want to be subsidized by the government. And if we're going to give taxpayer money to help big companies, then we deserve something in return. When he helped bail out Bank of America and Goldman Sachs, he got preferred stock, which allowed him to be paid dividends. And because those were both public companies, when the economy recovered and those stock prices went up, he made a boatload of money. There's no reason why the taxpayers can't do the same thing, or whoever's negotiating, whether it's Boeing, airlines, whatever it may be, any company. Let's ask for preferred shares of stock. Let's ask for options or warrants so that when the hardworking people of this country reinvigorate the economy, all American taxpayers benefit when the stock price goes up. Will the shareholders of those companies be hurt? Yeah, tough shit, right? This is taxpayer money. We need to get a return. And what Warren Buffett did was a great template that we should follow.
So you've been talking recently about a more compassionate capitalism, employees being more important than shareholders. Does there have to be a more compassionate capitalism? What does that look like?
Yeah, there has to be, right? Again, we've never seen in our lifetimes something this horrific. As a people, we have to incent companies to say, you know what, our employees are just as important as our shareholders, so they should be shareholders. I think every company should be incented through tax deduction, whatever it may be. We can't require it, but we certainly can incent that all employees be given equity options and warrants equal to the way they're given to executives. And the reason why that's important, when people live paycheck to paycheck, when you're getting paid by the hour and you're uncertain how many hours, you don't have any appreciable assets. You can't afford to buy a house. You can't afford to invest in the markets. You can't afford to buy bonds. When things get better, you're still working hour by hour and paycheck to paycheck. And so compassionate capitalism, common sense capitalism going forward after this reset means we're going to have to get appreciable assets in people's hands. Companies have got to realize that, particularly with Gen Z and millennials, they live a social media life. What they put on their TikToks, what they put on their Instagrams, what they put on their Snapchat stories, that's who they are. They're branding themselves. And companies who don't represent the things that millennials and Gen Z believe in, they're not going to see those customers come back. People want to associate, they want to buy from companies that are compassionate. Companies who don't recognize that are going to fail miserably. And that's not a bad thing.
A lot of people we've talked to have said, we have to fight this war, and everyone uses the language of war against Corona. Everyone's using it as a springboard. We need to change. We need to help economic disparity, social disparity. We need a safety net, et cetera. What do you see as the catalyst of change here for, entrepreneurial movement and or entrepreneurs going forward?
The uncertainty, right? The fact that we're going through a complete reset. We don't know what it's going to look like in America 2.0. We don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. There are going to be some amazing companies created out of this that we look back and say, why didn't I think of that? And that's where we're going to see unique opportunities. And the good news is, that's who we are as a country. We're a country of entrepreneurs. We can argue about whether or not the American dream is alive and well and who it supports and who it doesn't, but we still have more entrepreneurs than any other country in the world. And so I think it's a unique opportunity here for people to go out and do something special.
So speaking of the economic situation, there's been a lot of controversy recently, opening up versus not opening up. You're actually on the presidential appointed council for opening our country council. First of all, what is that council? Does the president listen to you? And what do you make of the controversy of opening up too early, states versus the Fed, and why aren't we listening to our scientists who are saying unequivocally, don't open up?
Well, a couple questions there. One, on the Economic Council, I'm the Sports Council, so it was one call, and that was pretty straightforward. But at the same time, they assigned me somebody in the White House for all my ideas. Now, they haven't said yes to anything yet, but at least I give them credit for letting me communicate with them. That's part one. Part two is the battle between the administration and the states. Now, like here in Texas, it's the state that's looking at opening up. When you talk to people at the top, they're all like, oh, this is what our doctors tell us. I guess medical doctors now are kind of like statistics. You can make them, appear to be anything that you want them to be. But here's how I'm looking at it. We need protocols. We need protocols for small businesses to follow so that they can feel confident and and customers feel like those protocols are strong enough that they feel confident to go into a retail establishment. You go in to buy some clothes and you want to try them on, you decide you don't want to buy them. What happens? You're in a restaurant. Somebody has a mask on. They sneeze. They leave that mask behind, or they sneeze without a mask. You shut down the whole restaurant? In my opinion, to try to open up without those protocols in place, you never know, right? Because this is all a crapshoot in a lot of respects, but could lead to disaster.
Now, that brings me to my next set of questions. You're not only an entrepreneur, you also own the Dallas Mavericks and are a sports figure. How bad was shutting down the NBA season? What does that cost you and or the other owners and the players and
I don't know
networks?
Totals, but obviously when you go from, business as usual to no business, there's an economic impact, and who knows when that's revived. I don't. How we play the games in arena, they'll probably, from a health perspective, change a little bit. I'll give you a point of reference.
I will have to retire from the Lakers.
Back when Magic Johnson announced he had AIDS, there were a lot of players who said that they would not play with him. They didn't understand how it could be transmitted, so they were all afraid. And there was a rule that was put in place called the blood infection rule. And what it says was any player that had blood on their uniform, that uniform had to be cleaned or changed out before they could return to play. That rule came into play in 1991 or 2. It's still in effect today. We're going to see comparable things happen where there are rules established that we think are necessary in order to maintain the health and safety of everybody involved. We'll figure out what those are and we'll implement them.
Have you thought about entering into the political spectrum?
Crazy shit happens, right? Things change. And so as an entrepreneur, I want to keep that door open.
So you've spoken a little bit about lack of leadership, lack of preparedness. Have you thought about entering into the political spectrum and, saying, "Hey, look, I'm a billionaire. I'm a TV personality. I can do this as well as the guys sitting."
Yeah, I try not to use those terms. Yeah, have I thought about it in the past? Yeah, I asked my family what they thought, and we took a family vote, and they voted it down. But these are different circumstances, and I've left the door open because, as we've seen over the past 6 weeks, 2 months, crazy shit happens, right? Things change, and so as an entrepreneur, I want to keep that door open. But I wouldn't say it's likely at all. And why would I consider it? For the reasons we just mentioned. I mean, everybody's so dogmatic, everybody's so partisan, and yet here we are in a circumstance with a lack of leadership from both sides, no real discussion on the best way to get things done. It's just all my way or the highway, and no real support for people who really need it the most. We're becoming a nation more of independents than of Republicans and Democrats, and I think the numbers bear that out, and there's nobody representing the everybody.
Well, Mark Cuban, we look forward to you throwing in your hat for the next electoral race. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me on, Shane. Great questions.
Congress is doing its job. And I want to tell the American people one more time, members are working daily to respond to the coronavirus that is putting our people and our country and our economy at risk.
Steny Hoyer is the House Majority Leader, the second-ranking member of the House Democratic leadership, and a critical figure in crafting Democratic policy. He's joining us from his house in Maryland. House Majority Leader Hoyer, thank you for taking the time today.
Well, thank you very much, Shane. I'm glad to be with you.
Now, I know you're very busy, so I'm just going to jump right into it. The CARES 2 Act. You guys have been drafting it, but not with the Republican side. What's happening there? It's been mentioned that it's maybe a political gambit. What's the thinking behind it?
Shane, first of all, let me say that we've had a lot of discussions with the minority over the last month and a half, 2 months now, about what actions we were going to take or wanted to take. But we are trying to get to a bipartisan agreement. We're trying to get a bill that we believe is essential going forward and is essential to be done now.
Recently, we talked to Representative Ocasio-Cortez about this sort of hearkening back to reaching across the aisle, bipartisan, legislation in the 90s. And she was saying that, we're looking back at this time of bipartisan legislation, but that era's gone. It's over, and the world has changed, and we're not going to go back to that. What do you have to say about that?
Well, now, Shane, first of all, we ought to look at the first 4 bills. Now, this will be the 5th bill. We call it CARES 2, but we've had 4 bills now that have dealt from early March to last week, and they've all been bipartisan. Now, they didn't all start out bipartisan. For instance, in the first bill, the administration asked for 2.5, but only $1.2 billion of new money to confront the coronavirus issue. We thought that was totally insufficient. And so we ultimately passed an $8.3 billion bill, which passed on a bipartisan basis. We hope this one can as well. But we ought not to forget that when we dealt with the Great Recession of 08 and 09, that wasn't bipartisan. Not a single Republican voted for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So this is not necessarily new.
There was never a genuine effort to get Republicans and Democrats in a room and try to find out how to stimulate the economy.
Bernanke, who was the Federal Reserve Chairman for a while, said if we hadn't done that, the country was going to go into a depression, not just a recession. So we want to be bipartisan, but we don't want to be bipartisan if the other side does not want to respond as quickly and as positively as we think we need to do.
How difficult is it to govern during this pandemic? Because you've got a sort of razor's edge you've got to balance on of we've got to keep the leadership of this country safe, yet during the pandemic, we need to legislate more than ever. What are the political mechanics of keeping the government working? And is remote voting an option? What are you looking at?
We came back for one day to pass those three bills. Members felt it absolutely essential that they come back. We took every precaution to keep them safe, keep staff safe, the press safe, and anybody who worked in the Capitol. But we cannot allow the Congress to be sidelined, particularly when we have the technology that we're using now. We think we can do that, and we're pursuing that, and I'm hopeful that we'll adopt rules which will empower the Congress to do that.
So you're the House Majority Leader, this, sort of a political mechanic. I like to think of you as Frank Underwood without the murder. So you're dealing with keeping the legislative body going. Now, on a bigger scale, this is an election year. The Russians have said, they like to mess with our elections. Now we've got China in the mix. How do we keep our elections safe and yet effective?
Well, first of all, our technology people need to do everything they possibly can, not only to intercept and determine whether or not the Russians, the Chinese, or any other government is trying to interfere with our elections. We're going to be pushing very, very hard that the Wisconsin experience, where the court required everybody to get in the line, put on a mask, stay 6 feet away from one another. You've been in an election line, Shane, I'm sure. That's very tough to do, particularly in a presidential where you have a lot of people coming to the polls. Our own state of Maryland, my state of Maryland, has, if you want an absentee ballot, you don't need to give a reason. There's no reason why every state ought not to be required in federal elections. Every voter has a mail-in ballot option available to them. Unfortunately, our Republican friends are not very excited about mail-in ballots.
Now, mail ballots, they cheat, okay? People cheat.
In any event, whatever their premise is, they ought to be facilitating voters to cast their vote. That's what our democracy is about. That's what America is about. And we ought to facilitate that. And there's going to be a portion of that assistance in the bill that we will propose in the near term to accomplish that objective.
What's your biggest fear?
My biggest fear is this frustration and this angst and this real pain that's being visited on American workers and families.
It was recently announced that jobless claims are up now in April to 20 million people. What are your thoughts there? Reopening the economy versus, keeping people safe and trying to, quote unquote, flatten the curve. What are you thinking about in Congress to mitigate,
Shane, my view is, well, we need to mitigate that, obviously. And one of the things we're going to do in this next bill is make an additional substantial investment in the capability of the states and localities to test and to have quick turnaround tests. And then you trace. So you got to do both. If you go back too quickly, you're going to make the problem worse, not better.
Your district has been particularly hard hit in Maryland, economically disadvantaged communities, Black and brown communities. So what are some of the plans that you have if these job loss numbers continue and indeed a lot of the economic, aid that is perceived, for example, again recently, where United Airlines was given, billions of dollars in loans and aid, and now is announcing that they're cutting hours and then will be cutting jobs. So how do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, most economists advise strongly that you don't let up the assistance until people are able to go back to work. With respect to the airlines, I think that they were perceived correctly by the Congress and by the administration as a critical component of our economy. And we knew they were going to be hard hit, so we made some special arrangements, billions of dollars for the airlines. But what we said in the process was, look, you can't use that money to buy back stocks. They did that in the Recovery Act, and that was wrong. So any additional sums that we give, we're going to make sure that they have those same kind of constraints involved. But the key and the focus is keeping people afloat. It was the fourth bill that we passed, was the small one, small. Ironically, we're talking about billions and we're talking about small. Secretary of Treasury said that PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, was running out of money. Matter of fact, it ran out of money in a very short period of time. We needed more. So he called up McConnell and said, I need $250 billion more. And we wanted to ensure that a significant portion of that money went to small businesses. That's why we included, who are not eligible for unemployment insurance, the gig economy workers, sole proprietor businesses. And we put in language in that bill that said we want the money to go through institutions that do in fact deal with small businesses, minority-owned businesses, disadvantaged business, the unbanked, if you will, because what the banks were doing, they were giving their good customers the money. The problem right now is we don't have enough data to know whether that's happening. And that's the focus. We need to keep the average person able to pay some of their bills, maybe not all, but some of their bills.
I wanted to just finish on a metaphysical level. I mean, you're privy to pretty much everything that's going on Capitol Hill. What's your biggest fear?
My biggest fear is that we will not, either at the federal level, the state level, or the local level, be dictated to by what science and health experts tell us to do. My biggest fear is this frustration and this angst and this real pain that's being visited on American workers and families by their inability to go to work will impel them or lead them to return too early, to do things that are too dangerous, that do things that exacerbate rather than mitigate the risks that we are confronting. So that's what keeps me up at night, that we're not going to do enough to make America safe.
Leader Hoyer, thank you for your time today, and thank you for your ongoing work.
Thanks, Shane. Appreciate it very much.